The UES Artemis hung in the void like a silver arrow, its quantum drives humming with barely contained power. Chief Engineer James Harrison stood at the viewport of his quarters, watching distant stars streak by in ribbons of light. After 15 years in deep space, he thought he'd seen everything the universe could throw at him. He was wrong. "Your living space is now here, Warrior Nkari," announced Commander Wells through the comm system. "Our chief engineer will show you the protocols." James turned as the door slid open with a soft hiss. In stepped a tall figure that made him pause mid-breath. The Solarian warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. Her ceremonial armor, a masterpiece of bioengineered crystal and alien alloys, caught the starlight and scattered it like diamonds. "Engineer Harrison," she said, her voice carrying the musical undertones typical of her species. "I am Vera Nkari, third blade of the Solarian High Command." Her crystalline eyes, faceted like gemstones, studied him with unmistakable wariness. "Welcome aboard," James replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Though I wish the circumstances were different." He gestured to the cramped quarters. "The hull breach in Section 7 has forced some creative arrangements." Vera's scales rippled in what he recognized as displeasure. "Indeed. I was not informed I would be sharing quarters with a human." "Trust me, I'm not thrilled either," James said, running a hand through his graying hair. "But with half the crew quarters damaged and the diplomatic necessity of maintaining your presence on board." He left the sentence hanging. The Solarian warrior moved to the far side of the room, her movements fluid despite the confined space. She placed a crystalline case on the spare bunk, its surface glowing with faint bioluminescence. "Your technology is primitive," she observed, eyeing his tools scattered across the workbench. James felt his jaw tighten. "Primitive got us across 3 galaxies," he countered. "And it's kept this ship running through situations that would have killed most crews." Vera's head tilted slightly, her scales shifting to a deeper blue. "Yet you required our aid when the quantum filament storm nearly destroyed your engines. And you needed our help when the Nexus pirates almost overran your outer colonies," James shot back. "That's why we're stuck together on this ship, isn't it? Neither of us can go it alone anymore." A moment of tense silence filled the room. Vera's crystalline eyes studied him, and James could almost hear the calculations running behind them. Finally, she spoke, "You are, direct, Engineer Harrison." "James," he corrected. "If we're sharing quarters, we might as well use names." The Solarian scales rippled again, but this time in a pattern he couldn't interpret. "Very well, James. But do not expect me to adopt human informalities beyond this." Before he could respond, the ship's alarm system blared to life. Red emergency lights pulsed through the room as the computer's voice echoed, "Warning. Quantum drive fluctuation detected. All engineering personnel report to stations." James was moving before the announcement finished, grabbing his toolkit. To his surprise, Vera stepped aside smoothly, making space for him to pass. "Your emergency?" she asked, her tone somewhere between curious and challenging. "About to find out," he replied, pausing at the door. A crazy thought struck him. "Want to see how primitive human engineering handles a crisis?" Vera's scales shifted to an interesting shade of violet. "I am a warrior diplomat. Technical matters are not my concern. Your people's quantum technology is part of our drive system now," James pointed out. "Might be worth understanding how it all works together." For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then she moved toward the door, her armor catching the red emergency lights like frozen fire. "Lead on, Engineer Harrison. Let us see if your solutions are as direct as your speech." As they hurried through the corridors, James couldn't help but think that this forced arrangement might be more interesting than he'd initially assumed. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen, but at least it wouldn't be boring. The quantum drive chamber loomed ahead, its massive doors sliding open to reveal organized chaos. Engineering crews rushed between stations, calling out readings and adjustments. The massive core pulsed with energy, streams of quantum particles dancing between human technology and Solarian crystals in a dangerous ballet. "Welcome to my office," James said with a grim smile. "Time to show you how we handle impossible situations." To his surprise, Vera's scales shifted to a color he hadn't seen before, something between anticipation and respect. "Perhaps," she said, "there are things we both might learn." The quantum core flared, and together they stepped into the crisis, two representatives of vastly different species about to discover that the greatest challenges often bring the most unexpected solutions. 3 days after the quantum drive incident, James found himself studying Vera's crystalline technology with newfound fascination. The Solarian warrior had proven surprisingly helpful during the crisis, her knowledge of quantum harmonics complementing his practical engineering expertise in ways he hadn't expected. "Your solution was unconventional," Vera commented, her scales shifting to a thoughtful azure as she watched him examine one of her ceremonial crystals. "No Solarian would have considered bypassing the quantum harmonizer's safety protocols." "Sometimes you have to break the rules to fix what's broken," James replied, carefully setting down the crystal. "Though I have to admit, your understanding of quantum resonance patterns saved us from a complete meltdown." The shared quarters had become less tense over the past few days, though neither of them would admit it openly. James had reorganized his tools to maintain better order, while Vera had relaxed some of her rigid formality, at least within their private space. "The Solarian High Command would not approve of me sharing technical knowledge with outsiders," she said, her scales rippling with conflicting colors. "But perhaps there are times when tradition must bend to necessity." Before James could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. "Engineering and diplomatic personnel, report to the bridge immediately. Unknown vessels detected on an intercept course." James and Vera exchanged glances. "Raiders?" he asked, already reaching for his toolkit. No, Vera's scales had shifted to a dark, warning purple. "The energy signatures are harvester vessels. They're drawn to quantum technology, and with our combined systems, we might as well be sending them an invitation." They moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, their steps now synchronized after days of working together. The bridge buzzed with activity as they arrived, tactical displays showing 3 massive vessels approaching the Artemis. "Harvesters haven't been seen in this sector for decades," Commander Wells announced, her face grim. "They're known for stripping ships of all technology, leaving crews stranded in space, if they survive at all." Vera stepped forward, her armor catching the light of the tactical displays. "They are drawn to power signatures. The quantum harmonics of our combined technologies must have attracted them. Can we outrun them?" Wells asked, looking at James. He shook his head, studying the readings. "Not with the quantum drive still recovering from the last incident. We'd tear ourselves apart." "Then we fight," Vera declared, her scales burning with a fierce copper glow. "Wait," James said, an idea forming. "What if we could use their attraction to quantum signatures against them? Vera, your crystals, they can be tuned to specific frequencies, right?" The Solarian warrior's eyes widened slightly as she caught his meaning. "You wish to create a resonance trap. It would require precise calibration between your systems and our crystals. And someone would need to manually adjust the harmonics from the drive chamber," James added. "One mistake and we could fry every system on the ship." Vera's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a determined gold. "Then we will not make mistakes. Your precision with tools, my knowledge of crystal harmonics, together we might succeed where either of us alone would fail." Commander Wells looked between them, noting the unexpected unity in their stance. "Do it. You have 20 minutes before they're in range." In the quantum drive chamber, James and Vera worked in fluid tandem, their movements complementing each other as if they'd trained together for years. He modified the drive controls while she arranged her crystals in a complex pattern around the core. The frequency must be exact, Vera warned, her scales pulsing with concentration. Too high, and we'll attract them more strongly. Too low, and the trap will fail. James's hands moved steadily over the controls, making microscopic adjustments. Ready when you are. Just like the safety protocols, sometimes you have to trust your instincts. Vera's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something beyond the warrior facade: respect, perhaps even trust. On my mark, she said, placing her hands on the primary crystals. 3, 2, 1. The quantum drive hummed to life, but this time it sang with a new harmony, human engineering and Solarian crystal technology working in perfect synchronization. The trap was set. Now they would discover if their combined ingenuity could overcome one of the greatest threats in known space. As the harvester ships approached, James and Vera stood side by side, watching the energy readings climb. Their shoulders nearly touched, and James noticed that Vera's scales had taken on a new color, one he hadn't seen before, something between hope and possibility. The quantum resonance trap worked better than anyone had expected. 2 of the harvester ships were caught in the feedback loop, their systems overwhelmed by the carefully tuned frequencies. But the third vessel, larger and more heavily armored than its companions, pushed through the quantum interference. "They're adapting," Vera announced, her scales darkening to a stormy gray. "The lead ship's energy signature is changing." James's fingers flew over the control panel. "They're using some kind of quantum dampening field. Our trap won't hold them much longer." The ship shuddered as the first volley of harvester weapons struck their shields. Commander Wells's voice crackled over the comm: "Engineering, we need options. Their boarding crafts are approaching." Vera's hand moved to the ceremonial blade at her hip, its crystal edge humming with energy. "They will attempt to access the quantum drive directly. It's their primary target." "Then we hold them here," James said, already moving to seal the emergency bulkheads. "But we need a way to neutralize that dampening field, or they'll strip this ship down to its bones." The Solarian warrior studied the crystal array they'd created, her eyes reflecting the quantum core's pulsing light. "There may be a way. My blade, it's constructed from the same quantum-sensitive crystal as our drive technology. If we could amplify its resonance through your power systems, we could create a localized overload," James finished, catching her thought. "But someone would have to get close enough to their boarding party to trigger it." Vera's scales shifted to the fierce copper of battle readiness. "I am a warrior. And I'm an engineer," James countered, grabbing his modified toolkit. "You'll need both for this to work." The first sounds of fighting echoed through the corridors, security teams engaging the harvester boarding parties. James and Vera worked swiftly, modifying her crystal blade with components from his tools. Her knowledge of crystal harmonics guided his technical expertise, creating something neither of their species had attempted before. "The resonance has to be precise," James warned, making a final adjustment. "Too strong, and it could affect our systems too." "Trust in my control," Vera replied, testing the modified weapon's weight. Her scales rippled with determination, but there was something else there too, a softer color when she looked at him. The drive chamber's secondary door burst inward. Harvester troops poured through, biomechanical horrors of twisted metal and flesh. Vera moved like liquid lightning, her modified blade leaving trails of quantum energy as she engaged them. James provided support from the control station, using the ship's systems to create electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the harvester's cybernetic components. They fought in perfect synchronization, her warrior's grace complementing his technical precision. When a harvester unit flanked James, Vera was there, her blade severing its quantum mechanical connections. When she needed an opening, he created one with precisely timed power surges. "Their dampening field is weakening," James called out, watching the readings. The blade's resonance is working. Vera acknowledged with a brief color shift of her scales, pressing the attack. The harvester units fell back, their systems destabilizing as the quantum interference spread through their ranks. But victory came with a price. A stray energy blast caught James in the shoulder, spinning him against the control panel. The Solarian warrior's reaction was instant and surprising. Her scales flashed with colors James had never seen before: fear, concern, and something deeper. She covered the distance between them in 2 fluid steps, placing herself between him and the remaining harvesters. "You are injured," she stated, her voice carrying an unfamiliar emotion. "I've had worse," James grimaced, pulling himself up. "Don't lose focus now." But Vera's protective stance didn't waver. Her scales now pulsed with a complex pattern, the copper of battle readiness overlaid with something warmer, more personal. The remaining harvesters charged, and she met them with renewed fury, her blade singing with quantum energy. James watched her fight, realizing that somewhere between their forced cohabitation and this moment of crisis, something fundamental had changed. The way she positioned herself to guard him, the new colors in her scales, the harmony of their combined efforts, it all spoke of a connection neither of them had anticipated. As the last harvester fell, Vera turned to him, her crystalline eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. The quantum core hummed behind them, human and Solarian technology working in perfect harmony, much like they had done. "Your shoulder requires attention," she said softly, her scales shifting to gentle colors he'd never seen her display before. "The ship comes first," James replied, but he found himself drawn to those impossible eyes, to the way her scales painted emotions he was just beginning to understand. The ship's alert system interrupted the moment. "Warning. Additional harvester vessels detected. All hands prepare for emergency maneuvers." They shared a look that contained volumes of unspoken words. Whatever was growing between them would have to wait. They had a ship to save, 2 cultures to protect, and a battle that was far from over. The aftermath of the harvester attack left the UES Artemis limping through space. Emergency repairs filled the corridors with the sound of welding and the glow of plasma cutters. In their shared quarters, James winced as Vera applied a regenerative crystal to his injured shoulder. "Your medical technology is inefficient," she stated, but her touch was surprisingly gentle. Her scales had settled into a soft, concerned azure that James was beginning to recognize. "Maybe," he replied, watching the crystal's glow seep into his wound. "But we're stubborn enough to survive anyway." The door chimed, interrupting their moment. Commander Wells entered, her expression grave. "We have a situation. The Solarian High Command is demanding Warrior and Kari's immediate return. They're claiming we deliberately endangered their representative by engaging the harvesters." Vera's scales flashed with indignation. "That is not their decision to make. I am Third Blade, and I choose where I stand." "Unfortunately," Wells continued, "they're threatening to withdraw from the Alliance. Without their quantum technology, our joint defense network will fail. We'd be vulnerable to the next harvester attack." James stood, ignoring the protest from his healing shoulder. "That's insane. We just proved that we're stronger together. Vera, your people have to see that." The Solarian warrior's scales shifted through complex patterns of emotion. "Our council values tradition above all. They fear." She paused, her crystalline eyes meeting James's. "They fear what might emerge from too close an association with humans." "You mean they fear this?" James gestured between them. "Whatever's happening here." The room fell silent. Commander Wells looked between them, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The Council's representatives will arrive in 6 hours. Find a way to make them understand, or everything we've built together falls apart." After Wells left, Vera moved to the viewport, her reflection rippling with colors James had learned to read over their time together. "My people believe that change brings chaos," she said softly. They see humanity's adaptability as a threat to our ordered existence. James joined her at the window, close enough to feel the energy field that always surrounded her crystalline armor. Change saved us today. Your warrior's discipline combined with our adaptability. My engineering with your crystal technology. He hesitated, then added, us. Vera turned to him, her scales flowing with new colors, uncertainty mixed with something deeper. The council would say I have been contaminated by human impulsiveness. That I have forgotten my training, my position. Have you? James asked, holding her gaze. No, she replied, her voice carrying that musical undertone that made his heart race. I have discovered something my people have forgotten. The strength that comes from growth, from allowing oneself to evolve. Her hand moved to his healed shoulder, the touch sending sparks through his entire body. From trusting one's instincts even when they defy tradition. A warning klaxon shattered the moment. Multiple quantum signatures detected. Harvester fleet on approach vector. They rushed to the bridge, arriving to find tactical displays filled with enemy vessels, far more than before. Commander Wells stood at the center, her face illuminated by the red alert lights. They followed their scout ships. This is a full invasion force. The Solarian Council vessels will arrive directly in their path, Vera said, her scales darkening with worry. They have no idea what they're flying into. James studied the tactical display, his mind racing. The quantum resonance trap, we could modify it, create a larger field using the Artemis and the Council ships together. But it would require the Council to work with humans, Vera finished. To trust in change. Wells nodded grimly. Get to engineering. Prepare what you need. When the Council arrives, you'll have one chance to convince them. As they hurried through the corridors, James caught Vera's arm. Whatever happens, whatever they decide. He struggled to find the right words. Vera's scales shifted to that impossible new color he'd first seen during the battle, the one that made his breath catch. I know, she said simply, her crystalline eyes holding promises neither of them could yet voice. They had 2 hours to prepare for either humanity's greatest alliance or its most devastating defeat. And somewhere in the chaos of quantum mechanics and political maneuvering, two beings from vastly different worlds were discovering that some bonds transcended the boundaries of species and tradition. The Solarian Council ships emerged from quantum space in a display of crystalline elegance, their hulls refracting starlight like multifaceted jewels. On the Artemis's bridge, James and Vera stood before the tactical display, watching as the massive harvester fleet approached from the opposite direction. Solarian vessels, this is Commander Wells of the UES Artemis. You're flying into a harvester invasion force. We need to coordinate our defenses immediately. The Council's response was swift and cold. We are here only to retrieve our warrior. Stand down, human vessel. Vera stepped forward, her scales blazing with determination. Honored Council, I am Third Blade Verankari. What I have learned aboard this ship could save both our peoples. You must listen. A tense moment passed before a new figure appeared on the view screen, High Counselor Thexare, his ancient scales a deep, midnight blue. You forget your place, Third Blade. Your prolonged exposure to humans has clearly affected your judgment. No, Vera's voice rang with conviction. It has expanded it. She gestured to James. This human engineer and I have discovered a way to combine our technologies that could defeat the harvesters. But it requires trust. It requires change. James stepped forward, addressing the Council directly. Your crystal technology, combined with our power distribution systems, can create a quantum resonance field large enough to disable their entire fleet. We've done it on a smaller scale. Let us show you. The harvester ships were closing fast, their biomechanical forms casting long shadows across the stars. High Counselor Thexare's scales shifted with barely contained disdain. You expect us to risk our vessels on an untested human theory? No, James replied, his voice firm. I expect you to look at the evidence before you. Look at what Vera and I accomplished together. Different approaches, different species, working in harmony, just like the quantum frequencies themselves. Vera moved closer to James, her scales flowing with colors that made the council members' eyes widen. I have seen humanity's strength, she declared. Not in spite of their chaos, but because of it. They adapt, they grow, they challenge assumptions, and they make us stronger by showing us new possibilities. The first harvester shots streaked across space, striking the Solarian ship's shields. High Counselor Thexare's image flickered. You speak of possibilities, Third Blade. What I see is the destruction of all we have preserved for millennia. What you see, James interjected, is the future. Either we face it together, or we fall separately. He turned to Vera, their eyes meeting in a moment of perfect understanding. Show them. Vera raised her modified crystal blade, its edge humming with combined human and Solarian technology. The quantum core's energy flowed through it, creating patterns of light that danced across the bridge. This is what harmony looks like, she said softly. This is what we can achieve together. The council chambers fell silent, watching the display of perfectly merged technologies. Another volley of harvester fire rocked their ships. Time's up, Commander Wells announced. Council, we need your answer now. High Counselor Thexare's scales shifted through colors James had never seen before, ancient patterns of decision and change. Proceed, he said finally. Show us this harmony you speak of. What followed was a dance of technology and trust. The Artemis and the Solarian vessels moved in perfect formation, their quantum systems linking through the modifications James and Vera had designed. Energy flowed between ships like lightning between stars. In engineering, James and Vera worked as one, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared experience. Human control panels and Solarian crystals sang together, creating a resonance field larger than anything either species had attempted. The harvester fleet hit the field at full speed. Ships began to fail, their quantum-based systems overloading in cascading waves of destruction. Those that tried to turn back found themselves caught in the expanding resonance pattern. It's working, James called out, his hands flying over the controls. The field is stable. Vera's scales had taken on that impossible color again, the one that spoke of new horizons and uncharted territories. Together, she said, her hand finding his over the crystal array. We are stronger together. As the last harvester ship fell dark, the quantum field rippled with success. On the council ship, High Counselor Thexare watched in amazement as decades of tradition gave way to new possibilities. Perhaps, he admitted slowly, there is wisdom in change after all. Hours later, in their shared quarters, James and Vera stood at their familiar viewport. The stars seemed brighter somehow, full of new potential. The Council has approved continued cooperation, Vera said, her scales shifting through gentle colors of contentment. They are calling it the Resonance Protocol. James smiled, turning to face her. Appropriate name. Everything in the universe resonates with something else. Particles, crystals. He reached out, his fingers nearly touching her luminescent scales. Hearts. Vera's crystalline eyes met his, all pretense of formal distance forgotten. My people believe that when frequencies align perfectly, they create something entirely new. Her scales rippled with that unique color that belonged only to him. Something neither could achieve alone. Is that what we are? James asked softly. A new frequency? Instead of answering, Vera closed the distance between them. Her scales shimmed with colors that needed no translation, and when their lips met, it felt like quantum particles finding their perfect resonance. The stars streaked by outside, witnesses to a harmony that defied traditional boundaries. In the vast expanse of space, two beings from different worlds had discovered that love, like quantum mechanics, cared nothing for the artificial barriers between species. It simply resonated, across all boundaries, creating something beautiful and new.